Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan and around the world. I'm Jaime Ocon. The U.S. and 28 other countries are currently conducting the world's largest international Navy drill, the Rim of the Pacific, also known as RIMPAC. The event takes place every 2 years and is part of the U.S.'s effort to expand security cooperation with its participants. Now, to better understand RIMPAC as a whole and its push for this idea of collective security, we're joined by David Santoro, CEO of PAC Forum, a think tank here based in Honolulu, which specializes in geopolitics and security in the Indo-Pacific region. David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's first zoom into RIMPAC. Why is this exercise important to the United States and other countries taking part?
So I would say two reasons. One is it's critical because it helps get visibility to what the United States and its allies can do when they actually cooperate militarily. And visibility is important because that's how you show what you can do and change potentially the calculus of your adversaries. It's number one. And then number two, as you're training, you actually learn to do more and to be, in this case, more military interoperable with the countries that you're working with. Mm-hmm. So, there's an ally component to it and there's a competitors component to it.
And if you had to kind of pick one and which one is leaning more towards, is the goal for RIMPAC then this show of force, or is it the demonstration of unity?
I'd say it's a little about both. Frankly, it's about learning to work together better, but also sending a message that we are working together, we are prepared to respond to potential threats and risks, and show that what we're capable of doing.
You talked about interoperability. For our viewers, can you kind of explain what does that mean when you, in terms of a military to military interactions?
So working better together, working and using tools and capabilities in a way that makes sense if you're different countries. So how can we work together using different tools and capabilities in a way that will have the maximum effect?
And most countries that are participating in RIMPAC, they are from the Indo-Pacific region, but also a handful from Europe as well, UK, France. Is this a trend that we're seeing, EU countries, European countries, expanding their presence in Asia?
Absolutely. In fact, every time I'm in Europe, you see European countries paying attention to what is going on in the Indo-Pacific. They want to learn what's going on. They are also increasingly concerned about the so-called China challenge. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is you have European countries that have vested interests and a presence in the Indo-Pacific, both in the Indo and the Pacific, and that's particularly the case of the UK and France. So yes, they want to do more and learn more about the Indo-Pacific, but some of them have been in the region for a long time, and therefore operating in the region is natural for them.
You mentioned China, in a RIMPAC, that name hasn't been mentioned too many times. Is this the consensus among the countries participating in RIMPAC that there is this growing threat that is China, as you say?
It is the major challenge, yes. I mean, this is essentially the primary competitor, not the only one in the Indo-Pacific, because we worry also about North Korea, for instance. But certainly this is what we see as what the United States calls the pacing challenge, the challenge to come. And as you know, we have active wars in Europe and in the Middle East, and we worry that we could get one here. And so RIMPAC is a way to actually respond to what could happen and hopefully deter a future war.
The Philippines did not send a naval ship to RIMPAC, and local media in the Philippines is citing strained resources and the situation regarding China in the South China Sea, the clashes there. And also, Taiwan has not been invited yet again. What does this say about commitment from and to the allies if the two countries that are affected most by China are not present at this exercise?
Well, I think they're very busy as it is. There's active tension, certainly for the Philippines, also for Taiwan, but it's very active in the Philippines. So I think what it says is that the allies that can actually contribute resources to military exercises can do that here, but there's such an intense activity over the Philippines and in and around Taiwan that the focus is going to be there in theater.
In your opinion, there has been calls for Taiwan to observe RIMPAC, not send a ship, but just, kind of stand on the sidelines. Why is that difficult for just getting that participation to happen at RIMPAC?
Well, I think you'll see an increase of Taiwan participation not in terms of seeing what's going on in military exercises. You'll see a lot more activity and words from allies voicing support to defending Taiwan if something is happening. So that's going to change, and it has been changing for a long time, but there's still a number of things that haven't been done. And frankly, I worry that what we're doing now is not sufficient and not fast enough to respond to the problem of the challenge posed by China.
And one more thing about Taiwan, you mentioned about maybe future cooperation. Where do you think we're going to see that? Is that military to military, law enforcement, or what do you think will be the most likely avenue for cooperation?
I think it's across the board. I think we'll see more diplomatic engagement, certainly more military cooperation. We'll see change maybe in policy by some actors. I mean, we've seen, for instance, Japan going vocal about what it could or could not do vis-a-vis Taiwan. So we'll see change across the board, not by everyone, but certainly a lot more people are paying a lot more attention to what could happen.
Well, now let's zoom out. With the United States involved in so many regions around the world, do you think it's being stretched too thin?
I mean, certainly what we have trouble doing in the United States is prioritizing. So we say in our strategy documents that China is the primary challenge, the pacing challenge. But we also have an active war in Europe, and then growing tensions and frankly, warlike scenario or warlike situations in the Middle East. And so it's very difficult to essentially respond to everything. And so I think moving forward, we will have to rely a lot more on our allies to essentially share much of the deterrence and defense burden, because the United States, even though we can still do a lot, can't do everything on its own. And I think what you'll see is a lot more rebalancing of roles and responsibilities towards our European allies. Essentially, we want Europe to do more so that the United States can do more in this particular region.
And just to be specific, you're saying European allies to do more at Europe, and so that the United States can focus on Asia? Is that what you mean?
Basically, yes, although as we've just discussed, Europeans are also interested in the Indo-Pacific. They have a role and a presence here, and they won't stop caring about the Indo-Pacific. But I think we want Europe to do more in Europe to respond to, obviously the Ukraine war and what's going on with Russia.
And there are many areas in East and Southeast Asia where there could be some form of military intervention that might be needed in the Korean Peninsula and the Taiwan Strait, as well as the South China Sea. Do you see the United States prioritizing any one of these cases in case one or more flare up at the same time?
No, I think we certainly worry about what could happen over Taiwan. But I will tell you, for instance, that personally, I think the chances of a major war, including a nuclear war, are probably higher in a contingency over the Korean Peninsula. Because if there is a contingency on the Korean Peninsula, you have many more actors involved. You have the Russians, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, and of course the United States. In a Taiwan contingency, it would certainly be very bad, but you'd have fewer actors immediately involved. So we worry about all potential contingencies. I would argue that right now we are not worrying enough about the potential for escalation in the Philippines. So I worry about the first shots being fired and then having a situation in which we are forced to respond or not respond with all the consequences that either choice would lead to. So I worry about this. And of course, not responding would be a problem, and responding would get us into a situation that we are trying to avoid by deterrence. And again, back to RIMPAC. The point of RIMPAC and all these exercises is to prevent us from getting into that situation in the first place. And I again worry that we're not doing enough.
How has that aim of deterring a potential aggressor like China evolved in recent decades? Are we seeing a new Cold War, or is this something different?
I would argue, yes, we are in a Cold War. It's not the same Cold War as the one we had with the Soviet Union, but we are certainly in a Cold War. We have strengthened deterrence. We are strengthening deterrence. We are strengthening our alliances. We are trying to engage new partners working with partners and allies in a trilateral, quadrilateral manner. We're trying to build a coalition that would essentially strengthen collective deterrence and defense. So all that is good, but we have China rising, we have a balance of power that is shifting, not necessarily in our favor. And so even though we're doing good things, I think that we're not doing enough good things and not fast enough.
The U.S. power projection in the Western Pacific is implicitly aimed at China, but at the same time, the United States and its allies are going to great lengths to try not to antagonize Beijing. They use vague language, exclude Taiwan, etc. Do you feel this is undermining the strength of those deterrence efforts?
It certainly makes it a lot more difficult. So yes, that you're right. A number of countries, they also want to have a good relationship with China, or at least not antagonize China. And therefore, it makes it a lot more difficult for them to sign up to a coalition that would focus on deterring China. And so this is a challenge that we have to deal with.
And I want to circle back to the Taiwan question, because you mentioned the reliance of the United States trying to reassure trust into those allies and partners. But with Taiwan, it's a bit difficult because it can't kind of participate on a formal basis. What do you think Taiwan can do to muster up its own deterrence?
So I think Taiwan needs to spend two things. Taiwan needs to spend a lot more than it is spending right now.